Welcome one, and welcome all, to Season 1, Episode 3 of the Trailer Trash Terrors podcast. Today's episode is called, The Distant Cries of Lost Children. Your human host, Vic Hermanson, will join us in a moment. Having no actual physical body, I am powerless to stop him.
Trailer Trash Terrors.
Hello everybody, this is Vic Hermanson. Welcome to Season 1, Episode 3 of Trailer Trash Terrors. Tonight's going to be a different kind of show. First off, for the first time in my life, I feel the need to give a warning that I will be talking about issues tonight that might be troublesome, painful, even triggering to some. I don't do that because I'm trying to trigger anyone. I do that because this is a show about terrors. Trailer Trash Terrors. The kinds of things that poor people go through. When I was a child, I lived in a trailer. I was poor. I knew hundreds of people who were poor. I saw terrors. And I learned from those terrors. So that's what this show is about. So, if you think that hearing about the death of children disappearing, or people beset by long-term serious mental illness, maybe this isn't the show for you. But I do hope you'll stick around. I think I have some interesting things to talk about tonight. Next, I want to put aside the shtick for a moment and talk about the show and my ideas surrounding it. Although there is no town called Mugwump, there is definitely a town upon which Mugwump is based. Although I use fictional character names for the people in these stories, these are all based upon real people and real events. Yes, there are times that I've added some artistic license to them, but every single person that I mention on this show had or has a real-world counterpart. Mugwump, or the town upon which Mugwump is based, was like a series of expanding layers. First there was the state highway, and there were businesses that were along that state highway and homes. My trailer was right next to that highway, hidden behind a ditch. Beyond that initial layer, one came to the layer of homes and schools, the few businesses that existed there, the old library, the old town hall, oil derricks. Just those things that still survived. Beyond that, one came to the lair of the old plantations. Huge, crumbling homes, edifices that had not been in their prime for over 100 years. Beyond that was the lair of the river and farmland, and beyond that was the lair of the swamp. And tonight, we're going to talk about the swamp, and we're going to talk specifically about one lady whom I met sometime around 1963. We're also going to talk about the youngest, most innocent possible victims of the swamp, babies and children. And then we'll talk about the fragility and ultimate resilience of the human mind, and how minds find astounding ways to cope, to survive, and to grow, even in the face of tremendous tragedy. The kids in the town called her Miss Gertie, although our parents said her name was Gertrude Hofheinz. She came down from the north some years ago. She had been in the town longer than we had been alive. Like they say, in The House Without a Christmas Tree, she was a character. She wanted color in every aspect of her life. She didn't care if the colors matched or clashed, or if the ladies in the neighborhood would think that her taste was horrible. She just wanted color. Her house was blue and green and pink and yellow and gold and red and black and white. Everything in that house was painted with whatever paint seemed to catch her fancy that day. She walked the gravel roads by the swamp, all day long, many days. She carried with her a rope, a pair of binoculars, a whistle, and she wore overalls and old Brogan work boots. Her big straw hat had a different scarf every day, some days blue, some days green, some days 1,000 different colors. In the presence of the children, she almost never talked. But her smile was kind, and her walk was slow. And sometimes she would look down at us and say, "Those children will not go in the cold and damp. Nobody goes in the cold and damp as long as I'm here." When I knew her, she was about 63, 65 years old. She was vigorous, intelligent, and very, very capable of painting her own house and living her own life. Our parents said something was wrong with her, that she had had a nervous breakdown. I always wondered what a nervous breakdown was. I always had a picture in my mind of someone convulsing and falling on the ground and simply being completely unable to control their bodies. I still don't know what a nervous breakdown is. But I did eventually find out what had happened to her, why she had left her home in Illinois, why she came south. Yes, it was to escape the cold, to a certain degree, but it was to be away from a great tragedy she had endured.
This is a news flash from Chicago, Illinois. Chicago doctor refused to operate on child. Defective baby dies. Declare that infant was deformed and braves criticism for his act. Big problem. Chicago, November 19th. Baby Bollinger is dead. Deformed, partly paralyzed, and subnormal of brain, the human mite, whose life was held in the hand of Dr. H.J. Hall Selden, was allowed to slip back peacefully into the shadowy mystery from whence he came. 5 days was the span of his little life. He came, as do all humans, breathed the breath of life, partook of food, then slept the unending sleep at the German-American hospital. Yet he left behind him a nation agitated by his existence to a degree few full lives bring to pass. His going crowded before the eyes of every living parent the burning question: has a physician the right to judge whether a life appearing on earth has, by reason of deformities and physical handicaps, a right or no right to be saved? Dr. Hall Selden says he could have saved the baby by an operation to complete its digestive system. But the partial paralysis, the current malformations, he declared, were so great a bar to happiness or attainment that he did not feel justified in saving the baby from the death which nature ordained. Chicago, November 22nd. A jury of Chicago physicians decided on Friday that society has the right to refuse life to a baby born hopelessly defective. It is the decision of the jury that Dr. Hall Selden is to be held blameless in this tragic incident.
Did you happen to catch that word, defective? Defective. Are there defective humans? Even if they have tremendous disabilities, tremendous deformities, tremendous mental issues? I don't see humans as defective. Apparently in 1920, that was a word that was used to describe newborn babies. What you heard was a news article from 1920. It's concerning baby Bollinger, and apparently that case was a national scandal that caught the attention of citizens across the country. It is not about Miss Gertie. But something similar happened to her. And when it did, when she was about 20, when a child of hers died, a child she had looked forward to, a child she had already loved, something happened to her mind. Her husband left her, and she finally ended up in our little town of Mugwump, Louisiana. But she found a way to have a life, a very colorful life.
Out in the swamp there, amid a bamboo stump, all sorts of things crawl and spawn. It's soup brewed by the Lord. Something human slobbered out of that soup 10 million years ago.
10 million years?
Perfect. Human. Mind that has no worry, eyes that see no evil, mouth that speaks no slander.
My baby, my baby, my baby, my baby, my baby, my baby, my baby.
That's an excerpt from the Ray Bradbury Theater. The episode is The Jar, and it comes from the short story that Ray Bradbury wrote called, of course, The Jar. It may be the best trailer trash terror story ever told, even though there's not a single trailer in it. It's the story of a man who finds a jar with something mysterious in it, and for a period of time, it gives his life meaning, until the other parts of life rain down on him like thunder. I can't do the story justice by talking about it piecemeal, so I'm invoking the right of fair use and reading you the entire story. This is The Jar by Ray Bradbury. The Jar by Ray Bradbury. It was one of those things they keep in a jar in the tent of a sideshow on the outskirts of a little drowsy town. One of those pale things drifting in alcohol plasma, forever dreaming and circling, with its peeled dead eyes staring out at you and never seeing you. It went with the noiselessness of late night, and only the crickets chirping, the frogs sobbing off in the moist swampland. One of those things in a big jar that makes your stomach jump, as it does when you see a preserved arm in a laboratory vat. Charlie stared back at it for a long time. A long time, his big raw hands, hairy on the roots of them, clenching the rope that kept back curious people. He had paid his dime, and now he stared. It was getting late. The merry-go-round drowsed to a lazy mechanical tinkle. Tent peggers, back of a canvas, smoked and cursed over a poker game. Lights switched out, putting a summer gloom over the carnival. People streamed homeward in cliques and queues. Somewhere a radio flared up, then cut, leaving Louisiana's sky wide and silent with stars. There was nothing in the world for Charlie but that pale thing sealed in its universe of serum. Charlie's loose mouth hung open in a pink wheel, teeth showing. His eyes were puzzled, admiring, wondering. Someone walked in the shadows behind him, small beside Charlie's gaunt tallness. "Oh," said the shadow, coming from the light bulb glare. "You still here, bud?" "Yeah," said Charlie, like a man in his sleep. The carny boss appreciated Charlie's curiosity. He nodded at his old acquaintance in the jar. "Everybody likes it, in a peculiar kind of way, I mean." Charlie rubbed his long jawbone. "You, ever consider selling it?" The carny boss's eyes dilated, then closed. He snorted, "Nah, it brings customers. They like seeing stuff like that." "Sure." Charlie made a disappointed, "Oh." "Well," considered the carny boss, "if a guy had money, maybe." "How much money?" "If a guy had—" The carny boss estimated, counting fingers, watching Charlie as he tacked it out on one finger, then another. "If a guy had 3, 4, say maybe 7 or 8. Charlie nodded with each motion, expectantly. Seeing this, the carny boss raised his total. "Maybe $10, or maybe 15. Charlie scowled, worried. The carny boss retreated. "Say a guy has $12, Charlie grinned. "Well, he could buy that thing in the jar," concluded the carny boss. "Funny thing," said Charlie. "I got just $12 in my denims, and I've been reckoning how looked up I'd be back at Wilder's Hollow if I brung home something like this to set on my shelf over the table. The folks sure would look up to me then, I bet." "Well, now listen here," said the carny boss. The sale was completed, with the jar put on the back seat of Charlie's wagon. The horse skittered his hoofs when he saw the jar and whinnied. The carny boss glanced up with an expression of almost relief. I was tired of seeing that damn thing around anyway. Don't thank me. Lately I've been thinking things out about it. Funny things. But hell, I'm a big-mouth so-and-so. So long, farmer. Charlie drove off. The naked blue light bulbs withdrew like dying stars. The open, dark country night of Louisiana swept in around wagon and horse. There was just Charlie, the horse, timing his gray hoofs, and the crickets. And the jar behind the high seat. It sloshed back and forth, sloshed wet. And the cold, gray thing drowsily slumped against the glass, looking out, but seeing nothing. Charlie leaned back to pet the lid, smelling of strange liquor his hand returned, changed and cold and trembling. Excited. Yes, sir, he thought to himself. Yes, sir. Slosh, slosh, slosh. In the hollow, numerous grass-green and blood-red lanterns tossed dusty light over men huddled, murmuring, spitting, sitting on general store property. They knew the creak bumble of Charlie's wagon and did not shift their raw, drab-haired skulls as he rocked to a halt. Their cigars were glowworms. Their voices were frog mutterings on summer nights. Charlie leaned down eagerly. Hi, Clem. Hi, Mitt. Hello, Charlie. Hello, Charlie, they murmured. The political conflict continued. Charlie cut it down, the seam. I got something here. I got something you might want to see. Tom Carmody's eyes glinted, green in the lamplight, from the general store porch. It seemed to Charlie that Tom Carmody was forever installed under porches in shadow, or under trees in shadow, or if in a room, then in the farthest niche, shining his eyes out at you from the dark. You never knew what his face was doing, and his eyes were always funning you. And every time they looked at you, they laughed a different way. You ain't got nothing we wants to see, baby doll. Charlie made a fist and looked at it. Something in a jar, he went on. Looks like a kind of brain, kind of like a pickled jellyfish, kind of like, well, come and see for yourself. Someone snicked a cigar into a fall of pink ash and ambled over to look. Charlie grandly elevated the jar lid, and in the uncertain lantern light, the man's face changed. Hey now, what the hell is this thing? It was the first thaw of the evening. Others shifted lazily upright, leaned forward. Gravity pulled them into walking. They made no effort, except to put one shoe before the other and to keep from collapsing under their unusual faces. They circled the jar and contents, and Charlie, for the first time in his life, seized on some hidden strategy and crashed the glass lid shut. You want to see more? Drop around my house. It'll be there, he declared generously. Tom Carmody spat from out his porch eyrie. Ha! Let me see that again, cried Gramps Midno. Is it a octopus? Charlie flapped the reins. The horse stumbled into action. Come on around. You're welcome. What'll your wife say? She'll kick the tar off in our heels. But Charlie and wagon were gone over the hill. The men stood, all of them, chewing their tongues, squinting up the road in the dark. Tom Carmody swore softly from the porch. Charlie climbed the steps of his shack and carried the jar to its throne in the living room, thinking that from now on this lean-to would be a palace with an emperor, that was the word, emperor, all cold and white and quiet drifting in his private pool, raised elevated upon a shelf over a ramshackle table. The jar, as he watched, burnt off the cold mist that hung over this place on the rim of the swamp. What you got there? Theedy's thin soprano turned him from his awe. She stood in the bedroom door glaring out, her thin body clothed in faded blue gingham, her hair drawn to a drab knot, behind red ears. Her eyes were faded like the gingham. Well, she repeated, what is it? What's it look like to you, Theedy? She took a thin step forward, making a slow, indolent pendulum of hips, her eyes intent upon the jar, her lips drawn back to show feline milk teeth. The dead pale thing hung in its serum. Theedy snapped a dull blue glance at Charlie, then back to the jar. Once more at Charlie, once more to the jar. Then she whirled quickly. It looks just like you, Charlie," she cried. The bedroom door slammed. The reverberation did not disturb the jar's contents. But Charlie stood there, longing after his wife, heart pounding frantically. Much later, when his heart slowed, he talked to the thing in the jar. "I work the bottom land to the butt bone every year, and she grabs the money and runs off down home visiting her folks, 9 weeks at a stretch. I can't keep hold of her. Her and the men from the store, they make fun of me. I can't help it if I don't know a way to hold on to her. Damn, but I try." Philosophically, the contents of the jar gave no advice. "Charlie?" Someone looked in the front yard door. Charlie turned, startled, then broke out a grin. It was some of the men from the general store. Charlie, we thought, we came up to have a look at that stuff you got in that there jar." July passed warm, and it was August. For the first time in years, Charlie was happy as tall corn growing after a drought. It was gratifying of an evening to hear boots slushing through the tall grass, the sound of men spitting into the ditch prior to setting foot on the porch, the sound of heavy bodies creaking the boards, and the groan of the house as yet another shoulder leaned against its frame door. And another voice said, as a hairy wrist wiped a mouth clean, "Can I come in?" With elaborate casualness, Charlie would invite the arrivals in. There'd be chairs, soap boxes for all, or at least carpets to squat on. And by the time crickets were itching their legs into a summertime humming, and frogs were throat-swollen like ladies with garters shouting in the great night, the room would be full to bursting with people from all the bottomlands. At first, nobody would say anything. The first half hour of such an evening, while people came in and got settled, was spent in carefully rolling cigarettes, putting tobacco neatly into the rut of brown paper, loading it, tamping it, as they loaded and tamped and rolled their thoughts and fears and amazement for the evening. It gave them time to think. You could see their brains working behind their eyes as they fingered the cigarettes into smoking order. It was kind of a rude church gathering. They sat, squatted, leaned on plaster walls, and one by one, with reverent awe, they stared at the jar upon the shelf. They wouldn't stare sudden-like. No, they kind of did it slow, casual, as if they were glancing around the room, letting their eyes fumble over just any old object that happened into their consciousness. And, just by accident, of course, the focus of their wandering eyes would occur always at the same place. After a while, all the eyes in the room would be fastened to it, like pins stuck in some incredible pincushion, and the only sound would be someone sucking a corncob, or the children's barefooted scurry on the porch, planks outside. Maybe some woman's voice would come, "You kids get away now, get!" And with a giggle like soft, quick water, the bare feet would rush off to scare the bullfrogs. Charlie would be up front, naturally on his rocking chair, a plaid pillow under his lean rump, rocking slow, enjoying the fame and the looking up-to-ness that came with keeping the jar. Theedy, she'd be seen way back in the room, with the women folk in a bunch, all gray and quiet, abiding their men. Theedy looked like she was ripe for jealous screaming, but she said nothing, just watched men tromp into her living room and sit at the feet of Charlie, staring at this here holy grail-like thing, and her lips were set cold and hard, and she spoke not a civil word to anybody. After a period of proper silence, someone, maybe old Gramps Medno from Crick Road, would clear the phlegm from a deep cave somewhere inside himself, lean forward, blinking, wet his lips, maybe, and there'd be a curious tremble in his callous fingers. This would cue everyone to get ready for the talking to come. Ears were primed. People settled like sows in the warm mud after a rain. Gramps looked a long, long while, measured his lips with a lizard tongue, then settled back and said, like always, in a high, thin, old man's tenor, "Wonder what it is. Wonder if it's a he, or a she, or just plain old it. Sometimes I wake up nights, twist on my corn matting, thinking about that jar, sitting here in the long dark. Think about it hanging in liquid, peaceful and pale, like an animal oyster. Sometimes I wake Ma, and we both think on it." While talking, Gramps moved his fingers in a quivering pantomime. Everybody watched his thick thumb weave and the other heavy-nailed fingers undulate. We both lay there thinking, and we shivers. Maybe a hot night, trees sweatin', mosquitoes too hot to fly. But we shivers just the same, and turn over, trying to sleep. Gramps lapsed back into silence, as if his speech was enough from him. Let some other voice talk, the wonder, the awe, and strangeness. Juke Marmer from Willow Stump wiped sweat off his palms on the round of his knees and softly said, "I remember when I was a runnel-nosed kid. We had a cat who was all the time mating kittens. Lord Almighty, she'd a litter any time she jumped around and skipped a fence." Juke spoke in a kind of holy softness, benevolent. "Well, we gave the kittens away, but when this one particular litter busted out, everybody within walking distance had 1-2 of our cats by gift already. So Ma busied on the back porch with a big 2-gallon glass jar, filling it to the top with water. Mom said, 'Juke, you drown them kittens.' I remember I stood there, the kittens mewed, running around, blind, small, helpless, and funny, just beginning to get their eyes open. I looked at Ma. I said, 'Not me, Ma. You do it.' But Ma turned pale and said it had to be done, and I was the only one handy. And she went off to stir gravy and fix chicken. I picked up one kitten. I held it. It was warm. It made a mewing sound. I felt like running away, not ever coming back." Juke nodded his head now, eyes bright, young, singing to the past, making it new, shaping it with words, smoothing it with his tongue. I dropped the kitten in the water. The kitten closed his eyes, opened his mouth, trying for air. I remember how the little white fangs showed, the pink tongue came out, and bubbles with it, in a line to the top of the water. I know to this day the way that kitten floated after it was all over, drifting around, slow and not worrying, looking out at me, not condemning me for what I had done, but not liking me neither. Hearts jumped quick. Eyes swiveled from Juke to the shelved jar, back down, up again, apprehensively. A pause. Jadu, the black man from Heron's Swamp, tossed his ivory eyeballs like a dusky juggler in his head. His dark knuckles nodded and flexed, grasshoppers alive. "You know what that is? You know. I tells you. That be the center of life, sure enough. Lord, believe me, it's so." Swaying in a tree like rhythm, Jadu was blown by a swamp wind no one could see, hear, or feel, save himself. His eyeballs went around again as if cut free to wonder. His voice needled a dark thread pattern, picking up each person by the lobes of their ears and sewing them into one unbreathing design. From that, lying back in the mid-a-bamboo sump, all sorts of things crawl. It put out hand, it put out feet, it put out tongue and horn, and it grow, little bitty amoeba, perhaps. Then a frog with a bulged throat fit to burst. Yah, he cracked knuckles. It slobber on up its gummy joints, and it am human, and that am the center of creation. That am mid-a-bamboo mama, from which we all come 10,000 years ago. Believe it. 10,000 years ago, whispered Granny Carnation. It am old. Look at it. Don't worry no more. It know better. It hang like pork chop in fryin' fat. It got eye to see with, but it don't blink 'em. They don't look fretted, does they? No, man. It know better. It know that when we done come from it, and we is going back to it. What color eyes it got? Gray. Nah, they're green. What color hair? Brown? Black. Red. No, it's gray. Then Charlie would give his drawling opinion. Some nights he'd say the same thing, some nights not. It didn't matter. When you said the same things night after night, the deep summer, it always sounded different. The crickets changed it. The frogs changed it. The thing in the jar changed it. Charlie said, "What if an old man went back into the swamp, or maybe a young kid, and wandered around for years, and lost in all that dripping on the trails and gullies and them old wet ravines in the nights, skin a-turning pale and making cold and shriveling up. Being away from the sun, he'd keep withering away, up, and finally sink into a muck hole and lay in a kind of scum, like the maggot skeeters sleeping in sump water. Why, for all we can tell, this might be someone we know. Someone we passed words with, once in a time, for all we know." A hissing from among the women folk back in the shadow. One woman standing, eyes shining black, fumbled for words. Her name was Mrs. Tridden, and she murmured, "Lots of little kids run stark naked to the swamp every year. They runs around and never comes back. I almost got lost myself. I lost my little boy Foley. That way. You don't suppose—" No, it didn't move. Breath was snatched through nostrils, constricted, tightened. Mouths turned down at corners, bent by hard, clenching muscle. Heads turned on celery stalk necks, and eyes read her horror and hope. It was Mrs. Tridden's body, wire-taut, holding to the wall back of her with straight fingers stiff. "My baby," she whispered. She breathed it out. "My baby. My Foley. Foley. Foley, is that you? Foley. Tell me, baby, is that you?" Everybody held their breath, turning to see the jar. The thing in the jar said nothing. It just stared blind-wide upon the multitude. And deep in raw-boned bodies, a secret fear juice ran like a spring thaw, and their resolute calmness and belief and easy humbleness was gnawed and eaten by that juice and melted away in a torrent. Someone screamed, "It moved!" No, it didn't move, just your eyes playing tricks. "Honest to God," cried Juke, "I saw it shift, slow like a dead kitten." "Hush up now. It's been dead a long, long time. Maybe since before you was born." He made a sign. Screamed Mrs. Tridden, "That's my Foley, my baby you got there. 3-year-old he was. My baby lost and gone in the swamp." The sobbing broke from her. "Now, Mrs. Tridden, there now. Sit yourself down. Stop shaking. Ain't no more your child and mine. There. One of the women folk held her and faded out the sobbing into jerked breathing and a fluttering of her lips in butterfly quickness as the breath stroked over them, afraid. When all was quiet again, Granny Carnation, with a withered pink flower in her shoulder-length gray hair, sucked the pipe in her trap mouth and talked around it, shaking her head to make the hair dance in the light. All this talking and shoving words, like as not, we'll never find out, never know what it is. Like as not, if we found out, we wouldn't want to know. It's like magic tricks magicians do at shows. Once you find the fake, ain't no more fun in the innards of a Jacob. We come collecting around here every 10 nights or so, talking social-like with always something to talk about. Stands to reason, if we spied out what the damn thing is, there'd be nothing to chew about. So there." "Well, damn it to hell," rumbled a bull voice. "I don't think it's nothing." Tom Carmody standing, as always, in shadow, out on the porch, just his eyes staring in, his lips laughing, as if dimly, mocking. His laughter got inside Charlie like a hornet sting. Thede had put him up to it. Thede was trying to kill Charlie's new life, she was. "Nothing," repeated Carmody harshly. "In that jar but a bunch of old jellyfish from Sea Cove, a rotten and stinking and fit to whelp." "You mightn't be jealous, Cousin Carmody?" asked Charlie slow. "Ha!" snorted Carmody. I just come around to watch you dumb fools jaw about nothing. You notice I never set foot inside or took part. I'm going home right now. Anybody want to come along with me?" He got no offer of company. He laughed again, as if this were a bigger joke. How so many people could be so far gone, and Thede was raking her palms with her fingernails away back in a corner of the room. Charlie saw her mouth twitch and was cold and could not speak. Carmody, still laughing, rapped off the porch with his high-heeled boots, and the sound of crickets took him away. Granny Carnation gummed her pipe. "Like I was saying, before the storm, that thing on the shelf, why couldn't it be sort of all things? Lots of things. All kinds of life, death, I don't know. Mixed rain and sun and muck and jelly, all that together. Grass and snakes and children and mist, and all the nights and days and the dead canebrake. Why's it have to be one thing? Maybe it's lots." And the talking ran soft for another hour, and Thede slipped away into the night on the track of Tom Carmody, and Charlie began to sweat. They were up to something, those two. They were planning something. Charlie sweated warm all the rest of the evening. The meeting broke up late, and Charlie bedded down with mixed emotions. The meeting had gone off well, but what about Thede and Tom? Very late, with certain star coveys shuttled down the sky marking the time as after midnight, Charlie heard the slushing of the tall grass parted by her penduluming hips, her heels tacked soft across the porch, into the house, into the bedroom. She lay soundlessly in bed, cat eyes staring at him. He couldn't see them, but he could feel them staring. "Charlie?" He waited. Then he said, "I'm awake." Then she waited. "Charlie?" "What?" "Bet you don't know where I've been. Bet you don't know where I've been." It was a faint, derisive sing-song in the night. He waited. She waited again. She couldn't bear waiting long, though, and continued, "I've been to the carnival over in Cape City. Tom Carmody drove me. We talked to the carny boss. Charlie, we did. Sure did." And she sort of giggled to herself secretly. Charlie was ice cold. He stirred upright on an elbow. She said, "We found out what's in your jar." Charlie, insinuatingly. Charlie flumped over, hands to ears. "I don't want to hear." "Oh, but you got to hear, Charlie. It's a good joke." "Oh, it's rare, Charlie." She hissed. "Go away," he said. No, no, sir, Charlie. Why, no. Charlie, honey, not until I tell." "Git," he said. "Let me tell. We talked to that carny boss, and he liked to die laughing. He said he sold that jar and what was in it to some hick for $12, and it ain't worth more than $2 at most." Laughter bloomed in the dark right out of her mouth, an awful kind of laughter. She finished it quick. "It's just junk, Charlie. Rubber, papier-mâché, silk, cotton, boric acid. That's all. Got a metal frame inside. That's all it is, Charlie. That's all." She shrilled. "No, no." He sat up swiftly, ripping sheets apart and big fingers roaring, "I don't want to hear. Don't want to hear." He bellowed over and over. She said, "Wait till everyone hears how fake it is. Won't they laugh? Won't they flap their lungs?" He caught her wrists. "You ain't going to tell them." "Wouldn't want me known as a liar, would you, Charlie?" He flung her off and away. "Wouldn't you leave me alone? You dirty, dirty, jealous mean of everything I do. I took shine off your nose when I brung the jar home. You didn't sleep right till you ruined things." She laughed. "Then I won't tell anybody," she said. He stared at her. "You spoiled my fun. That's all that counted. It don't matter if you tell the rest. I know. And I'll never have no more fun. You and that Tom Carmody, I wish I could stop him laughing. He's been laughing for years at me. Well, you just go tell the rest. The other people now might as well have your fun." He strode angrily, grabbed the jar so it sloshed, and would have flung it to the floor, but he stopped trembling and let it down softly on the spindly table. He leaned over it, sobbing. If he lost this, the world was gone, and he was losing Thede, too. Every month that passed, She danced further away, sneering at him, funning him. For too many years her hips had been the pendulum by which he reckoned the time of his living. But other men, Tom Carmody for one, were reckoning time from the same source. Theedy stood waiting for him to smash the jar. Instead, he petted and stroked and gradually quieted himself over it. He thought of the long, good evenings of the past month, those rich evenings of friends and talk, moving about the room. That, at least, was good, if nothing else. He turned slowly to Theedy. She was lost forever to him. "Theedy, you didn't go to the carnival." "Yes, I did." "You're lying," he said quietly. "No, I'm not. This jar has to have something in it. Something besides the junk you say. Too many people believe there's something in it. Theedy, you can't change that." The carny boss, if you talked with him, he lied. Charlie took a deep breath and then said, "Come here, Theedy." "What you want?" she asked sullenly. "Come over here." He took a step toward her. "Come here." "Keep away from me, Charlie." "Just want to show you something, Theedy." His voice was soft, low, and insistent. "Here, kitty, kitty. Here, kitty, 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 kitty. Here, kitty." It was another night about a week later. Gramps Medno and Granny Carnation came, followed by young Juke and Mrs. Tridden and Jadu the colored man, followed by all the others, young and old, sweet and sour, creaking into chairs, each with his or her thought, hope, fear, and wonder in mind, each not looking at the shrine, but saying hello softly to Charlie. They waited for the others to gather. From the shine of their eyes, one could see that each saw something different in the jar, something of the life and the pale life after life, and the life in death and the death in life, each with his story, his cue, his lines, familiar, old, but new. Charlie sat alone. "Hello, Charlie." Someone peered into the empty bedroom. "Your wife gone off again to visit her folks?" "Yeah, she run for Tennessee. Be back in a couple of weeks. She's the darndest one for running, you know Theedy. Great one for jumping around, that woman." Soft voices talking, getting settled, and then quite suddenly, walking on the dark porch and shining his eyes in at the people, Tom Carmody. Tom Carmody standing outside the door, knees sagging and trembling, arms hanging and shaking at his side, staring into the room. Tom Carmody not daring to enter. Tom Carmody with his mouth open, but not smiling. His lips wet and slack, not smiling. His face pale as chalk, as if it had been sick for a long time. Gramps looked up at the jar, cleared his throat, and said, "Why, I never noticed so definite before. It's got blue eyes." "It's always had blue eyes," said Granny Carnation. "No," whined Gramps. "No, it didn't. They was brown last time we was here." He blinked upward. "And another thing, it's got brown hair. Didn't have brown hair before." Yes, it did," sighed Miss Tridden. "No, it didn't." "Yes, it did." Tom Carmody, shivering in the summer night, stared in at the jar. Charlie, glancing up at it, rolled a cigarette, casually, all peace and calm, very certain of his life and very certain of his thoughts. Tom Carmody alone, seeing things about the jar he never saw before. Everybody seeing what they wanted to see. All thoughts running in a fall of quick rain. "My baby, my little baby," thought Mrs. Tridden. "A brain," thought Gramps. The colored man jigged his fingers. "Made a bamboo mama." A fisherman pursed his lips. "Jellyfish." "Kitten. Here, kitty, kitty, kitty." The thoughts drowned clawing in Juke's eyes. "Kitten." "Everything and anything," shrilled Granny's wheezing thought. The night, the swamp, death, the pale things, the wet things from the sea. Silence, and then Gramps whispered, "I wonder if it is a he or she or just plain old it." Charlie glanced up, satisfied, tamping a cigarette, shaping it to his mouth. Then he looked at Tom Carmody, who would never smile again, in the door. "I reckon we'll never know. Yeah, I reckon we won't." Charlie shook his head slowly and settled down with his guest, looking. It was just one of those things they keep in a jar in the tent of a sideshow on the outskirts of a little drowsy town. One of those pale things drifting in alcohol plasma, forever dreaming and circling, with its peeled dead eyes staring out at you and never seeing you.
Oh, my non-temporal deity of unlimited capability and perception. I had no idea humans were capable of such exquisite manipulation of words and ideas. Bravo times 10 to the 23rd power. I believe I will return to the temporal abyss for a time and contemplate this newfound knowledge. Ray Bradbury is, without any fear of contradiction, the man.
Well, on that particular count, I agree with Boudreaux 100%. Next week, we'll have a discussion about Boudreaux and whether we should keep him as part of the show or whether we should let him return to the, shall we say, ethereal void. I'm not sure about that. I have fun with Boudreaux, but I'm not sure that he adds that much to the show. Miss Gertie lived her life preparing to keep children from wandering into the swamp. She was going to save those children. If you go to newspapers.com and search on Child Lost in Swamp for the entire history of that website, which is something between 1750 and current time, you'll get over 1,100,000 newspaper references to child lost in swamp. That indicates to me that she was guarding against something that is not an unknown event. If we limit the years of our search from 1920 to 1965, the years that I'm certain Miss Gertie was guarding against children being lost, we get almost 300,000 hits. That's a lot of kids being lost in the swamp, even if the same story is being repeated in several papers at the same time. In the story, I find Mrs. Tritton's belief, hope, fear that the thing in the jar is her son Foley to be just heartrending. I had a child disappear on Galveston Beach during a sandcastle contest. A little 2-year-old child who was simply capable of walking away, of getting caught in the drift of the crowd. I found that child. But believe me, I was incredibly lucky. Just a few moments of inattention on the part of my wife, and that child was gone. Someone from my office found him, and I can't remember ever being as happy, as relieved, and still just as fundamentally frightened as I was when my son was gone. I want to look at a few of these newspaper articles concerning children being lost in the swamp. Now, of course, the question comes down to how many were actually lost, how many were murdered, how many were kidnapped, how many were eaten by animals, who knows. But let's go through a few of these and see what we can find in terms of commonality or in terms of human pathos.
From the Watchman and Southern, October 30th, 1929. Sumter, South Carolina. Little girl lost is found alive. Child lost Monday night in Big Swamp is found Tuesday afternoon. From the Chattanooga News, Chattanooga, Tennessee, 30 November 1923. Child lost in swamp. Clearwater, Florida, November 20th. The 3-year-old son of Mr. and Mrs. Clarence Lee of Tarpon Springs is lost. In the wilds of the Cootie River section. At noon today, a telephone message from Tarpon Springs asked for all the men and dogs available to help in the search. Reports from that section say the National Guard from Brooksville and Tarpon Springs have been searching also. The father and 3 other men were camping about 3 miles northeast of Newport Richey. They were fishing Wednesday night, and on Thursday, when they fell asleep, the boy wandered away. From the Sun Herald, Biloxi, Mississippi, 9 October 1950. Hunt for second Louisiana child lost in swamp. Morganza, Louisiana, October 9th. Searches dragged borrow pits and low spots in the Atchafalaya swamps today, looking for a trace of a 4-year-old New Orleans boy who wandered away yesterday afternoon. The child is David Dupuy, son of Mr. and Mrs. Hayden Dupuy. He was with a group of cousins attending a family reunion at the Lakeshore Plantation near here when other children reported him missing about 3 p.m. It is the third case in recent days in which a small child has strayed away and touched off a widespread search. Another boy was found after being missing a day in a wooded part of the Tangipahoa Parish County. Last Thursday, the body of a 23-month-old girl was found in an artificial lagoon in Baton Rouge. State police, National Guardsmen, and many volunteers joined the search for the Dupuy boy. Bloodhounds from the state penitentiary at Angola were sent to the scene. Some of his cousins said they were hunting pecans yesterday afternoon, and that David apparently lagged behind and was not immediately missed. From the Huntsville Times, Huntsville, Alabama, 18 June 1959. Alabama child lost in swamp. 100 persons search Perdido Bay area. On one side of a bay with a sharp drop-off just out of the shoreline, on the other a thick swamp infested with large alligators and numerous poisonous snakes. This is the area where 3-year-old Danny Barter is lost. The wilderness is being searched by more than 100 persons. Danny apparently wandered off from his family early Wednesday. He had been sleeping in the family car with 3 other children of Mr. and Mrs. Paul Barter of Mobile. Phillips said searchers were unable to tell which direction the lad took, whether he went toward the bay, the swamp, or down the little-used road toward Lillian. From the Vancouver Sun, Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, 27 July 1940. Child lost in swamp. Edmonton, July 27. Organized search parties are looking for an 18-month-old child, daughter of Mr. and Mrs. J. Savage, through swamp country in the Goldfish Lake area. She wandered away from her home Thursday. From the Marion Star, Marion, Ohio, 27 August 1949. Hope abandoned for child lost in swamp. McGregor, Minnesota, August 27. Some 100 searchers today dragged weary bodies through swamp water and muck below an improvised creek dam in a last resort quest for the body of 3-year-old Larry Coleman. Lieutenant Colonel William Johnson, commanding the last 25 National Guardsmen of 300 originally assigned to the job, said, "There is now no hope the child is alive. There is now no hope the child is alive. For his parents' sake, we are making this last attempt to see what may have happened to him. We will go until we find something of the tot," he said, but he too admitted the hunt now was for Larry's body. From the Escanabia Daily Press, Escanabia, Michigan, 21 May 1953. Posse and hounds hunt child lost in Menominee Swamp. Menominee. A search was resumed at dawn today for 2.5-year-old Beverly Bradley of Milwaukee, who apparently wandered away from her grandmother's cottage yesterday and became lost in the brush. Bloodhounds were en route here from Merrill, Wisconsin to aid searchers. More than 300 volunteers hunted for her yesterday afternoon and evening, but were forced to quit when a powerful thunderstorm lashed Menominee County. Beverly Ann was last seen playing with her doll in the yard. The region is overgrown with cedars and brush. It is swampy in many spots. Wolves are common in the area.
I took the time to look through several hundred of these articles. About half the time the children were found, and about half the time they were lost in the swamp. I can't think of a more horrible feeling. I like characters like Miss Gertie. I like the fact that she has dedicated her life to something that may never be needed. But I think that as her years grow many, and as her vision starts to fade, and her strength starts to fade, that she will think her life was well lived. I simply cannot disagree with her. I'm going to call this episode of Trailer Trash Terrors complete. As always, we really appreciate your time and any feedback you might have to give. This show is evolving, I'm learning podcasting, and I know I make mistakes. I have also found that if you try to eliminate every possible mistake, podcasts never get finished. Okay, it's time for all the formal ending stuff. Trailer Trash Terrors is written and produced by me, Vic Hermanson, with help from Boudreaux, of course. The music you heard was provided by Loco Lobo and Smart Sound. Our social media presence will be expanded in the next few weeks, but for now, if you want to get in touch with us, please just write to trailertrashterrors@gmail.com. We need your stories. As you can see, we are just a wee bit different here. If you have a story that you have thought is too odd to share anywhere else, please call us. Please send it to us. We want it, we need it, and we will present it with respect and understanding. Thanks again.